The moment Kimberly Anderson stepped into apartment 5B of Sunset Towers, she had no idea her life was about to change forever. All she knew was that she needed this part-time caregiver job to pay her mounting student debt, and Mrs. Eleanor Lopez seemed like a sweet old lady who just wanted company during her favorite soap operas. What Kimberly didn't realize was that Eleanor wasn't just any elderly woman. She was the beloved aunt of Donald Lopez, the reclusive pharmaceutical magnate, whose face graced the cover of last month's Forbes. And in 3 weeks' time, a chance hot air balloon ride would throw them together in the most unexpected way. "You relate, dear," Eleanor noted, without taking her eyes off the television screen where two glamorously dressed characters were, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument about a secret baby. The apartment was modest but elegantly furnished, with framed black and white photographs lining the walls. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Lopez," Kimberly apologized, hastily hanging up her worn coat. "The subway was delayed, and then my phone died, so I couldn't call to—" "Shh!" Eleanor raised a finger, her eyes still glued to the screen. "Ricardo is about to tell Victoria about the affair. I've been waiting for this moment for 2 weeks. Kimberly fought back a smile as she quietly slipped into the armchair beside Eleanor's plush sofa. For a woman who supposedly needed companionship, Eleanor seemed perfectly content in the company of her fictional friends. After a few minutes, as the scene came to its dramatic conclusion, Eleanor finally turned to Kimberly with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. "Now tell me about your day, dear, and do not leave out any of the juicy details. My life may be confined to these 4 walls, but that doesn't mean I can live vicariously through you." Over the next few hours, as they watched 2 episodes back-to-back, Kimberly found herself sharing more than she had intended. Her struggles with her art degree, her dreams of opening her own gallery someday, and even the disastrous date she'd had last weekend with a guy who spent the entire evening talking about his cryptocurrency investments. "Men," Eleanor scoffed, passing Kimberly a plate of homemade cookies. "They think we re-impressed by their money, when what we really want is their attention." She paused, studying Kimberly with an appraising look. "You know, my nephew is coming to town next month. He is quite successful, but don't worry, he never talks about it." "Oh, that is nice," Kimberly replied politely, wondering why Eleanor thought she'd be interested in meeting her nephew. After Todd, the cryptocurrency enthusiast, she wasn't exactly eager to jump back into the dating pool. "More than nice," Eleanor insisted with a knowing smile. "He's single, hard-working, and best of all, he knows how to listen. A rare combination these days." Kimberly laughed, reaching for another cookie. "With all due respect, Mrs. Lopez, I am not really looking for setups right now. My relationship track record isn't exactly stellar. Sometimes the best things happen when we're not looking for them," Eleanor replied cryptically, turning back to the television just as the dramatic music signaled another shocking revelation. Little did Kimberly know that as she sat there in that cozy living room, surrounded by the dramatic lives of soap opera characters, her own life was about to take a turn that even the most imaginative scriptwriters couldn't have dreamed up. And it would all begin with a golden ticket hidden inside a box of her favorite cereal, a free hot air balloon ride over the Manhattan skyline, courtesy of a citywide promotion she had completely forgotten entering. The same promotion that a certain Donald Lopez had absent-mindedly entered when his assistant suggested it might help improve his public image. The same Donald who had never taken a day off in 5 years. The same Donald who was about to meet a woman who would turn his perfectly organized world completely upside down. But for now, Kimberly just reached for another cookie, blissfully unaware of the fateful wheels already set in motion, as Eleanor watched her with a secretive smile that would have put any soap opera villain to shame. Donald Lopez stared out the window of his corner office, 52 floors above the chaotic streets of New York. From this height, the people below looked like ants, busy, purposeful, but ultimately insignificant in the grand scheme of things. That is how he had built his pharmaceutical empire, by seeing the bigger picture when others were distracted by details. "Mr. Lopez, your 3:00 clock was cancelled, and your aunt called." Again. His assistant Veronica stood in the doorway, her expression professionally neutral despite the implicit criticism in her words. Donald sighed. "What did Aunt Ellie want this time?" "No. She insisted that you pick up the prize for some promotion you supposedly entered, a hot air balloon ride." Veronica's perfect eyebrow arched slightly, the only indication of her skepticism. "She was quite adamant that you do it personally, rather than sending someone from the office. That's ridiculous. I never enter promotions." Donald turned back to his computer screen, already dismissing the conversation. "She said you say that. She also said to remind you that she still has the photos from your 7th grade dance recital and wouldn't hesitate to show them to the board members at the next charity gala." Donald's fingers froze over his keyboard. "That's blackmail. But she prefers to call it creative persuasion," Veronica replied, the ghost of a smile flickering across her face before disappearing into her usual professional demeanor. "The certificate needs to be picked up this Saturday at Central Park, 10 a.m. sharp." "Fine," Donald conceded, making a mental note to increase the security on his childhood memorabilia the next time he visited his storage unit. But schedule a meeting immediately after, so I am not wasting an entire morning." After Veronica left, Donald returned to reviewing the quarterly reports, but his concentration was broken. His aunt had been acting strangely lately. More insistent about his social life, more cryptic in her messages. At 82, Eleanor Lopez was still as sharp as the day she helped him secure his first business loan. She had practically raised him after his parents died, sacrificing her own dreams of traveling the world to ensure he had stability during his formative years. He owed her everything, which is why he found himself standing in Central Park that Saturday morning, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit among the weekend joggers and tourists in comfortable attire. "Name?" asked the bored-looking attendant at the promotional booth. "Donald Lopez," he replied, checking his watch. 9:58. At least he wasn't late. The attendant's eyes widened slightly at his name before she recovered her composure. "That's right, you'll be on the list. Just need to wait for the other winner, and then you'll both be briefed together." "Other winner?" Donald frowned. "No one mentioned sharing this experience." "It is a couple's promotion, sir. Love is in the air campaign. 2 winners get to enjoy the sunrise balloon ride together." She handed him a brochure with embarrassingly cheesy hearts and cartoon balloons printed on it. Donald was about to turn around and leave, Aunt Ellie's blackmail be damned, when a breathless voice behind him called out, "Sorry, I am late. Did I miss it?" He turned to find a young woman with wind-tousled hair rushing toward the booth, her cheeks flushed from running. There was something strikingly familiar about her, though he was certain they had never met. Donald prided himself on remembering faces. It was an essential skill in his line of work. "Kimberly Anderson?" the attendant confirmed, checking her list. "That's me," the woman replied, trying to catch her breath. "I almost forgot about this whole thing. Found the winning ticket in my cereal box months ago." "Well, you're just in time. This is Donald Lopez, the other winner. You will be sharing the balloon ride." And the Kimberly, as eyes met Donald's, and for a moment he felt a strange jolt of recognition, followed by an even stranger flutter in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending her hand, with a warm smile that somehow reached all the way to her eyes. "Sorry if I kept you waiting." As Donald shook her hand, He couldn't help but notice the flecks of paint beneath her fingernails and the worn leather messenger bag slung across her body, a stark contrast to the polished, calculated women who usually populated his social circle. "Not at all," he heard himself saying, though punctuality was one of his cardinal rules. "I just arrived myself." The attendant cleared her throat. "Your pilot will meet you over there in about 5 minutes. There's coffee and pastries while you wait." As they walked toward the waiting area, Donald racked his brain for something to say. Small talk had never been his forte when Kimberly spoke first. "So, do you make a habit of entering random promotional contests? Or was this your first surrender to marketing tactics too?" There was something teasing in her tone that would normally irritate him, but instead he found himself almost smiling. "Actually, my aunt entered for me. She's quite persuasive. Sounds like my kind of woman." Kimberly laughed, and the sound was so genuine it caught him off guard. "I am pretty sure I entered this while half asleep. I have a terrible habit of online shopping when I can sleep. At least this time it was free." Before Donald could respond, a cheerful man in a uniform approached them, introducing himself as their pilot. As they were led toward the massive balloon being inflated on the great lawn, Donald found himself strangely grateful for his aunt's meddling. There was something refreshingly unpretentious about Kimberly Anderson, something that made the prospect of being trapped in a wicker basket thousands of feet in the air seem almost enjoyable. What he didn't know was that this chance encounter had been meticulously orchestrated by his aunt, who at that very moment was chuckling to herself as she watched her favorite soap opera, feeling quite proud of her real-life matchmaking skills. The sunrise painted New York City in hues of gold and pink as the hot air balloon drifted lazily above the skyscrapers. Kimberly couldn't help but gasp at the breathtaking view. The city she had known for years suddenly transformed into a miniature wonderland from this new perspective. "It is like looking at a living painting," she murmured, almost forgetting she wasn't alone until Donald cleared his throat beside her. "It is quite remarkable," he agreed, his voice softer than it had been on the ground. Up here, away from ringing phones and business meetings, he seemed less rigid, more human. Their pilot, a weathered man named Jack, who had been sharing interesting facts about the city's architecture, discreetly moved to the other side of the basket, giving them a semblance of privacy. "So, what do you do, Donald Lopez, when you are not being blackmailed by your aunt into balloon rides?" Kimberly asked, turning to face him. In the early morning light, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes. Not from age, he couldn't be much over 35, but from stress, or perhaps too much frowning. Donald hesitated, and Kimberly immediately sensed his reluctance. Most people loved talking about themselves, but he seemed to be calculating his response. "I work in pharmaceuticals," he said finally, the deliberate vagueness not lost on her. "At research and development mostly." "How mysterious," she teased. "Let me guess. Either you were being modest about running the whole operation, or you were actually developing a top-secret formula to turn us all into zombies." A surprised laugh escaped him, perhaps the first genuine one in weeks. "Nothing so exciting, I'm afraid. Just regular medications that help people live better lives." He paused, studying her with newfound curiosity. "What about you? Those paint stains suggest something more creative than corporate life." Kimberly looked down at her hands, slightly embarrassed by the rainbow of colors permanently embedded beneath her nails. "And I'm an artist, or trying to be anyway. I teach art at an elementary school during the day and work on my own pieces at night. Plus, I recently started a part-time job keeping an elderly woman company while she watches soap operas." "That with a lot of jobs," Donald observed, something like respect flickering across his features. "Well, art supplies aren't cheap, and neither is rent in this city." Not all of us have corner offices, she replied, nodding toward the imposing glass tower they were currently floating past. Donald followed her gaze, and for a split second, Kimberly could have sworn she saw something like longing in his expression.
"Those corner offices come with their own price tags," he said quietly. The conversation lulled as they drifted over Central Park, the morning joggers appearing as tiny moving dots below them.
Kimberly was struck by how peaceful it felt up here, suspended between earth and sky, with a virtual stranger who somehow didn't feel strange at all. "My aunt watches soap operas," Donald said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Religiously. Every afternoon from 2 to 4, Kimberly smiled, thinking of Eleanor. "Mine too. Well, not my aunt, but the woman I sit with, Mrs. Lopez. She is completely addicted to Passionate Hearts and The Secret Lives of Manhattan. I've honestly started getting invested in the storylines myself." Donald froze, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the basket. "Did you say Lopez? Eleanor Lopez?" "Yes. Do you know her?" Kimberly asked, confused by his sudden intensity. "She's my aunt," he said flatly, his earlier relaxed demeanor vanishing. "The same aunt who insisted I pick up this ridiculous balloon ride prize personally." The pieces clicked together in Kimberly's mind, and her eyes widened in realization. "Wait, you are that Donald? Her nephew who runs some big company and works too much? The one she's always trying to set me up with?" She took a step back, nearly bumping into Jack the pilot. "Oh my God, this isn't a coincidence at all, is it?" Donald's expression hardened. "Apparently not. It seems we've both been manipulated." "She's been planning this for weeks," Kimberly said, remembering all the not-so-subtle comments Eleanor had made about her wonderful nephew who just needed the right woman to help him enjoy life again. She kept asking if I liked heights, if I found hot air balloons romantic. "And did you?" Donald asked unexpectedly, his voice neutral, but his eyes searching. The question caught Kimberly off guard. "Did I what?" "Find hot air balloons." "Romantic," he clarified, a hint of his earlier warmth returning despite the revelation of his aunt's scheming. Kimberly looked around at the magical cityscape, the golden light of dawn casting everything in a dreamlike glow, and then back at Donald, his perfect suit now slightly rumpled, his carefully styled hair tousled by the wind, making him look more approachable, more real. "I do now," she admitted with a small smile, "even if we were tricked into it." Something shifted in Donald's expression, a softening, a surrender to the moment. "My aunt has always been too clever for her own good, or for mine in this case." Jack announced they would be beginning their descent soon, breaking the spell of the moment. As they prepared to return to solid ground, Kimberly wondered if this brief connection would dissolve once they stepped out of the basket and back into their separate worlds. But as the balloon touched down and they were helped out by the ground crew, Donald surprised her by asking, "Would you like to get coffee?" "To discuss how best to get revenge on my meddling aunt, of course." Kimberly laughed, the tension of the revelation melting away. "I'd like that. Though I should warn you, after spending weeks with your aunt, I've become quite fond of her. My revenge plots might be somewhat half-hearted." "Mine too," Donald admitted as they walked away from the landing site. "She did, after all, introduce me to someone who doesn't seem thoroughly impressed or intimidated by whatever sheik has told you about me." "Oh, she told me plenty," Kimberly assured him with a mischievous smile. "But I've learned to take Eleanor's dramatic storytelling with a grain of salt. Comes from watching too many soap operas, I think." As they headed toward a nearby cafe, neither of them noticed the satisfied smile on Jack the pilot's face as he spoke quietly into his phone. "Mission accomplished, Mrs. Lopez." They were getting coffee together. Eleanor's delighted laugh carried through the line, her matchmaking scheme unfolding precisely according to plan. The cafe buzzed with the typical Saturday morning crowd, young couples sharing pastries, freelancers hunched over laptops, and tourists consulting guidebooks. Kimberly and Donald found a small table by the window, the awkwardness of their balloon, revelation giving way to curiosity about each other. "So you re not just in pharmaceuticals, you re Donald Lopez of Lopez Pharmaceuticals," Kimberly said after they de-ordered. "The same company that recently developed that breakthrough treatment for childhood leukemia." She studied his face, looking for signs of the corporate shark Eleanor had occasionally described between singing his praises. Donald shifted uncomfortably. "I prefer to keep a low profile. The work matters more than the name behind it. That is not what the internet says. According to Google, you're either a ruthless business genius or the most eligible bachelor in New York's corporate world, depending on which article you read." She stirred her latte casually, enjoying his discomfort a little too much. "And what does Eleanor say?" he asked, meeting her gaze directly. Kimberly considered this, remembering the tender way Eleanor spoke about her nephew. "She says you, brilliant but lonely, that you've forgotten how to live outside your office, that you have your father as mind and your mother as heart, though you try to hide the latter." She paused, suddenly aware she might be overstepping. "Sorry, that was probably too personal." "No," Donald said quietly. "She's not entirely wrong. The company became my whole life after—" He trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. "After my fiancée left 6 years ago. She said she was engaged to a man, not a corporation." Kimberly felt a surge of sympathy, finally understanding the guarded look in his eyes. That must have been hard. "It was a wake-up call I apparently hit snooze on," he replied with unexpected self-awareness. "Enough about my tragic backstory. What is your excuse for being single? Eleanor mentioned you were not seeing anyone." "Of course she did," Kimberly laughed. "My excuse is less dramatic. I am just too busy working 3 jobs to sustain my unrealistic dream of becoming a successful artist in the most expensive city in America." "I'd like to see your work sometime," Donald said, surprising her with his sincerity. Their conversation flowed easily after that, jumping from art to business ethics to Eleanor's soap opera addiction. Kimberly found herself charmed by the way Donald's professional facade occasionally slipped, revealing flashes of humor and thoughtfulness. "You are nothing like I expected," she admitted as they left the cafe 2 hours later. "Is that good or bad?" he asked, walking beside her through the park. "Definitely good. Eleanor made you sound like a workaholic robot with occasional human programming." Donald laughed, the sound more natural now than earlier. "And you exactly, as she described, talented, straightforward, and completely unimpressed by status or wealth." They reached a crosswalk, the inevitable moment of parting approaching. Kimberly felt a strange reluctance to end their time together, which made no sense. Men like Donald Lopez didn't date women like her, women with paint-stained hands and multiple jobs. "I have an art show next Friday," she blurted out before she could overthink it. "At a small gallery in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, just a collective showing of local artists. You could come if you want, no pressure." Donald looked genuinely pleased by the invitation. "I'd like that. Text me the details." He handed her his business card, sleek, minimalist, with just his name and number. "I will," she promised, tucking the card into her bag. As they said goodbye and headed in opposite directions, Kimberly felt like she had stepped into one of Eleanor's soap operas. The unlikely meeting, the meddling matchmaker, the chance connection between 2 people from different worlds. It was ridiculous, really, yet she couldn't stop smiling all the way home. What Kimberly didn't know was that Donald had cancelled his scheduled meeting, the first time he'd ever done so without a medical emergency involved. Instead, he found himself walking through Central Park, replaying their conversation, and wondering what it was about Kimberly Anderson that made him feel more alive in 3 hours than he had in the past 6 years. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor Lopez watched through her window as Kimberly approached the building, noticing her radiant smile. "Phase 1 complete," the elderly woman murmured to herself, reaching for her phone to call her co-conspirator, Jack the balloon pilot, who also happened to be her nephew as former college roommate. Time for Phase 2. The gallery buzzed with the energy of opening night. Clinking glasses, animated conversations, and the collective nervousness of artists watching strangers evaluate their work. Kimberly smoothed down the front of her dress, a vintage find she splurged on after receiving her last paycheck, and tried to focus on explaining her painting to an interested couple rather than checking the door every 30 seconds. She hadn't heard from Donald since sending him the details of the show 3 days ago. No confirmation, no cancellation, just silence, which was fine, completely fine. They'd spent one morning together, orchestrated by his matchmaking aunt. It wasn't like she built up any expectations. "Your use of negative space is quite striking," the woman was saying, gesturing toward the canvas where Kimberly had painted a solitary figure on a New York rooftop, the vast city spread out behind them but rendered in ghostly transparent strokes. "Thank you," Kimberly replied, dragging her attention back to her potential customers. "I was exploring the paradox of urban loneliness, how we can feel most isolated when surrounded by millions." As she finished her explanation, a familiar figure appeared at the gallery entrance. Donald stood uncertainly in the doorway, looking both wildly out of place in his expensive suit and somehow exactly where he belonged. Their eyes met across the room, and he offered a tentative smile that made her heart perform an unexpected somersault. Excusing herself from the couple, Kimberly weaved through the crowd toward him. "You came," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "I said I would," he replied, handing her a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Sorry I didn't confirm. We had a crisis with a clinical trial that required my full attention." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught her off guard. "Thank you. They were beautiful." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things neither quite knew how to say. Finally, Donald gestured toward the exhibited works. "Show me your art." Kimberly led him through the gallery, suddenly nervous as they approached her small collection. 5 paintings that represented months of late nights and early mornings squeezed between teaching and visiting Eleanor. Donald stood before each piece for a long time, saying nothing, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched until Kimberly couldn't bear it any longer. "They're still evolving," she said quickly. "I'm experimenting with different techniques and they extraordinary," he interrupted, his voice soft but certain. "Especially this one." He pointed to the rooftop painting, the one the couple had been examining earlier. "It captures exactly how I've felt for years, surrounded but completely alone." The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep within her. "That is exactly what I was trying to convey." Their eyes met, and for a moment the crowded gallery seemed to fade away. Donald reached out, his fingers brushing against hers so lightly she might have imagined it. "Kimberly, there you are!" The moment was shattered by the gallery owner's boisterous greeting. "The Jacobsons want to purchase Urban Solitude. Come meet them." As she was pulled away to meet the buyers, Kimberly glanced back at Donald, who nodded his understanding. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and congratulations. She sold 3 of her 5 paintings, a success beyond her wildest expectations. When the crowd finally thinned, she found Donald examining her remaining works, deep in conversation with one of her fellow artists. "Ready to go?" he asked as she approached. "I thought we might celebrate your successful debut." 20 minutes later, they were seated on the rooftop of a small restaurant in Brooklyn. the Manhattan skyline glittering across the river. The waiter brought champagne, and Donald raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "To new beginnings," she echoed, wondering what exactly they were beginning. The champagne loosened their inhibitions, and conversation flowed freely. Donald told her about growing up under Eleanor's unconventional guardianship after his parents' death, about the pressure of inheriting a pharmaceutical company at 26, about his dreams of using his resources to make medicine more accessible globally. In turn, Kimberly shared her childhood in a small Midwestern town, her decision to move to New York against her parents' wishes, her struggle to balance artistic integrity with financial survival. "Do you know what Eleanor told me the first day we met?" Kimberly asked as they shared a dessert. "She said that soap operas are popular because they remind us that everyone has a story worth telling, even if it seems ordinary on the surface." Donald smiled fondly. "That sounds like her. She's always been a romantic, despite never marrying herself." Why didn't she?" Kimberly asked, realizing she knew little about Eleanor's personal history, despite spending weeks in her company. A shadow crossed Donald's face. "She was engaged once, to my father's best friend. But when my parents died, she gave it up to raise me. By the time I was grown, her fiancé had moved on. She never complains, but sometimes I wonder if she resents the sacrifice." "I don't think she does," Kimberly said gently. "She speaks of you with such pride, and she is determined to see you happy. Hence the elaborate hot air balloon scheme." Donald laughed. As the evening drew to a close, they walked along the Brooklyn promenade, the city lights reflecting on the water. Donald stopped suddenly, turning to face her. "I haven't felt this way in a long time," he admitted, his usual confidence replaced by a vulnerability that made him seem younger, more accessible. "Being with you is easy, like I can breathe again." Kimberly felt her pulse quicken, the intensity of his gaze both thrilling and terrifying. "And I feel it too," she whispered. "But Donald, we come from different worlds. You run a multinational corporation. I teach finger painting to second graders and can barely make rent some months." "Does that matter?" he asked, stepping closer. "In real life, usually, yes. But not in soap operas," he countered with a smile. "We were not in one of Eleanor's soap operas," she reminded him, even as her body betrayed her by leaning toward him. "Maybe we could be," Donald murmured, his hand gently cupping her cheek. The unlikely couple who defies expectations, the corporate tycoon and the artist with paint-stained hands. When his lips finally met hers, Kimberly understood why. People in movies always kissed against spectacular backdrops. Because when it's right, the world around you becomes the perfect stage for your own personal drama. What neither of them noticed was the discreet Blacktown car parked nearby, or Eleanor's delighted expression as she watched from the back seat, or Jack taking photographs with a telephoto lens at her insistence. "Perfect," Eleanor declared, already planning the next phase of her matchmaking scheme. "Now we just need to overcome her insecurities and his workaholism, and we'll have them married by Christmas." Jack lowered the camera, giving his co-conspirator a bemused look. "You know, most people just set their relatives up on blind dates. They don't orchestrate elaborate scenarios worthy of the soap operas you watch." Eleanor patted his hand indulgently. "My dear, where would be the fun in that? Besides," and she added with a wistful smile as she watched the couple still embracing by the railing, "some love stories deserve a spectacular beginning." Epilogue. 6 months later, Kimberly stood in Eleanor's apartment, helping the older woman pack her belongings. The walls were bare where photographs had hung, the shelves empty of the knickknacks that had made the space so distinctly Eleanor's. "Are you sure about this?" Kimberly asked, carefully wrapping a delicate porcelain figurine in bubble wrap. "It's not too late to change your mind." Eleanor looked up from the photo album she'd been flipping through, her eyes bright, with excitement rather than regret. Changed my mind about traveling the world at 82. Not a chance, my dear. I've waited long enough to have my own adventures. The past months had brought changes none of them could have anticipated. Donald had indeed come to Eleanor's apartment to confront her about her matchmaking scheme, only to find Kimberly there. Instead of the awkward encounter Eleanor had hoped for, they'd all ended up laughing about the elaborate plot over tea and cookies. What followed was a whirlwind romance that surprised everyone except Eleanor, who claimed she'd known they were perfect for each other from the moment Kimberly had passionately defended a soap opera character's questionable life choices. Donald had gradually reduced his working hours, delegating more responsibilities to his capable team. Kimberly had quit her job as a teacher when a prestigious gallery offered to represent her work after seeing her paintings at Donald's corporate headquarters, where he proudly displayed them in the main lobby. And Eleanor, inspired by their blossoming relationship and newfound zest for life, had announced her intention to finally fulfill her own long-deferred dreams of traveling the world. Besides, Eleanor added, closing the album, now that you two are moving in together, I'll have someone trustworthy looking after my apartment while I am gone. Kimberly smiled, remembering Donald's nervous proposal that they find a place together, halfway between their two worlds, he suggested. Somewhere with good natural light for her painting and reasonable proximity to his office. Instead, they decided to renovate Eleanor's apartment, expanding it by purchasing the neighboring unit as well. It was the perfect solution, close to Kimberly's gallery in Brooklyn, not too far from Donald's office, and filled with the warm memories of where their story had truly begun. "We'll keep it exactly as you left it," Kimberly promised. "Well, maybe with an art studio added and that wall between the kitchen and living room removed." "Make it yours," Eleanor insisted. "Homes should evolve with the people who live in them, just like people evolve with love." The doorbell rang, and moments later Donald appeared carrying takeout bags. "Dinner is served, ladies. How is the packing going?" "Almost done," Eleanor reported. "Just in time for my flight tomorrow." As they ate together around the coffee table, just as they had done countless times while watching Eleanor's beloved soap operas, Kimberly marveled at how thoroughly her life had transformed in half a year. From struggling artist to successful, a gallery darling from lonely New Yorker to part of this unconventional family unit. "Oh, I almost forgot," Eleanor exclaimed, reaching for her purse. She pulled out 3 small envelopes and distributed them. "Open them." Inside, Kimberly found a ticket for a hot air balloon ride scheduled for the following month on the anniversary of their first meeting. "For old times' sake," Eleanor explained with a wink, "and because every great love story deserves an annual commemoration of its beginning." "You be incorrigible," Donald laughed, but he tucked the ticket carefully into his wallet. Later, after Eleanor had retired to finish her packing, Donald and Kimberly stood by the window overlooking the city that had brought them together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't both won that balloon ride?" Kimberly asked, leaning back against his chest as his arms encircled her waist. "We didn't win anything," Donald reminded her, kissing the top of her head. "Aunt Ellie rigged the whole thing, remember? There was no actual promotion." "Wait, what?" Kimberly turned in his arms, genuinely shocked. "The whole thing was fake. The certificates, the pilot, everything." Donald nodded, amused by her surprise. "Jack was my college roommate. The promotional team was hired actors. The balloon company was legitimately rented, but there was no contest. Aunt Ellie orchestrated the entire scenario." "That's actually impressive," Kimberly admitted, laughing at the elaborate lengths Eleanor had gone to. "She should write for one of her soap operas. Who do you think sends them anonymous plot suggestions every month?" Donald replied with a grin. Where did you think the storyline about the meddling grandmother reuniting long-lost lovers came from? As the city lights twinkled below them, Kimberly thought about the extraordinary chain of events that had led her here. All because she'd taken a part-time job watching soap operas with an elderly woman. An elderly woman who turned out to be not just any lonely senior, but a master manipulator with a heart of gold and a nephew in need of love. We should thank her properly before she leaves, Kimberly said softly. I already have, Donald replied. I set up a foundation in her name to fund arts programs in underserved communities. Kids like you used to teach who might otherwise never get to explore their creative talents. Kimberly felt tears welling in her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. That S perfect, she'll love that more than any going-away present we could buy. There is something else, Donald said, his voice suddenly serious as he turned her to face him fully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Kimberly's breath caught. Donald, I am not proposing, not yet, he clarified quickly, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver key. This is the key to my heart, metaphorically speaking, but it is also the key to a studio I've rented for you 3 blocks from here. A place that's just yours where you can paint without worrying about getting pigment on our new furniture. You understand me so well, she whispered, taking the key and holding it tight. 6 months ago, she would have been suspicious of such an extravagant gift, would have worried about maintaining her independence. Now she understood that love didn't have to mean losing yourself. It could mean finding someone who wanted to help you become more fully who you were meant to be. From the guest room, they heard Eleanor humming to herself as she continued packing, the theme song from Passionate Hearts, the soap opera that had brought them together. Do you think soap operas have happy endings because that's what people want, or because sometimes life really does work out that way? Kimberly asked, leaning her head against Donald's shoulder. Donald considered this, watching the city lights flicker like stars below them. And I think, he said slowly, that happy endings aren't endings at all. They were just moments when we pause the story and say, this, right here, this moment is perfect. As if on cue, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her favorite teacup in hand. Would you 2 lovebirds care to join an old woman for one last episode before bed? Ricardo is finally going to propose to Victoria after 5 seasons of will they won or they drama. Donald and Kimberly exchanged a knowing smile. We wouldn't miss it for the world, they said in unison, following Eleanor to the couch, where their unlikely love story had first begun. Proof that sometimes reality could be even more surprising, more satisfying, and more romantic than fiction. The next morning, as they waved goodbye to Eleanor at the airport, watching her stride confidently toward her gate with a lifetime of adventures ahead, Kimberly felt Donald's arm tighten around her waist. She'll be back, you know, Beep said softly, just in time for our wedding. Kimberly looked up at him in surprise. Is that a proposal, Mr. Lopez? Not yet, he replied with a mysterious smile that reminded her eerily of Eleanor S. But when it happens, it'll be a scene worthy of any soap opera finale. As they walked hand in hand through the terminal, Kimberly couldn't help but think that Eleanor Lopez had given them both the greatest gift possible, not just each other, but the reminder that it's never too late to rewrite your story, to take chances on love, and to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, life could be as magical as the most fantastical soap opera plot. And somewhere high above the Atlantic, Eleanor Lopez raised a champagne glass to her own reflection in the airplane window, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction and the knowledge of a matchmaking job well done. To new beginnings, she whispered, echoing the toast that Donald and Kimberly had shared that night on the Brooklyn rooftop, for all of us. The end.